Welcome everyone for another edition of the Freedom to Formulate podcast. I'm your host once again, Dave Barbash. I'm super excited to have lovely guest today, Ashley Hurst. Welcome, Ashley.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, it's always lovely to talk to you. Ashley, for everyone out there, is the owner of the Crohn's and Colitis Dietitians. It's a virtual private practice supporting IBD patients in the US and Canada for the last 11 years. You've had your own struggles with ulcerative colitis, and that sparked your journey in becoming a dietitian and starting your business. So every dietitian at the Crohn's and Colitis Dietitians has their own history with IBD in some form or another. And you're using your own education expertise to help your patients navigate through their own IBD journeys. And I think that to me is, you've gone through it, you can identify what they're going through, and I think it really helps bring them closer to you because they've known that you've actually gone through it yourself. Ashley and her team are also the hosts of the Gut Feelings podcast, and have a very active YouTube channel, the Crohn's and Colitis Dietitians, where you and your dietitians discuss many topics related to IBD, nutrition, and much more. Now, you've been an active voice in the IBD space, and you've written over 10 ebooks on a variety of digestive health topics focused around IBD and the gut microbiome, which we're going to delve into today. You're the creator of the Rainbow Method and a product line, Gut Love, which we'll also be diving into, which I'm excited to do that. Both were sparked by your deep interest in the gut microbiome and making colorful, fiber-rich foods more accessible to those with sensitive guts. And I'm a big fan of the rainbow diet myself, and I try to get that full spectrum of colors in my diet. Lately, I don't know why, but I'm into purple sweet potatoes, and I have an addiction to that.
Nice. I love those.
Yeah, me too. Well, one of the things you shared with me before we started today's podcast was it's Colon Cancer Awareness Month. Maybe share a little bit of insight into Colon Cancer Awareness Month, why it's important for people to be aware, and what are the most important things to look for in terms of testing, maybe signs, maybe reaching out to a qualified professional like yourself.
Yeah, I have to admit, with colon cancer, I shy away from talking about it sometimes because I think we all kind of feel there's a scaredness in general with it, but I do think with stuff like that, it's important to bring it to light and to do what we can do to prevent it, because it is so preventable if we're doing, the proper screenings, if we're paying attention. There's a lot that we can do that is in our control. It is on the rise, like 3% annual rise in those under 50. So we continue to see people younger get it, and so that's why the colon cancer recommendations or screenings, like colonoscopies, they're moved down, and they keep getting moved down. Now it's like 45, because 1 in 5 get diagnosed. So it is important that we screen, because there aren't always classic signs. Some people will get blood in their stool, and that will be their cue to go see somebody, but other times it's, just like your average stuff, like maybe you deal with some gut issues, but they seem regular or like the normal population. So it is important to, do stuff like get your regular screenings, to talk about it with your GI, to talk about it in general. It's a normal thing we all do, right? We all poop. So it's important to talk about it and to, get comfortable discussing it and doing things about it. The other thing that we can really do is check for nutrients. Nutrients play a key role too in your gut microbiome. So like vitamin D, for example, is a really important one when it comes to inflammation regulation and cancer prevention. So that's a really important one. And then the other thing is leafy greens. We don't often think about it or give them enough credit, but there's a study I was telling you about earlier. It's 70,000 people they looked at which is a big study.
Yeah, good
They
population.
they looked at like leafy green intake and in particular folate rich foods because folate plays an incredible role in protecting like our colon cells environment and like a little bit of a preventative aspect as well. And those that had adequate folate and folate rich foods, they were able to see a 9% decrease in risk for colon cancer. So I think that's pretty cool too.
Right.
So these are all things that are accessible to everybody in a sense. Like we can use some of these things, and even if you're on a budget, like you can pick different things. Like there is a affordable way to do it too, to just pick and choose some preventative things that you can just work into your day to day.
Yeah, and there's also in the spectrum of organic versus non-organic, if somebody's on a budget, usually like to refer them to the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. And, you know, the clean ones that have low pesticide tonnage or exposure or usage, then it's okay to go conventional if they've got that protective mechanism, say on the fruit or the outer shell. But then, you know, things like strawberries, cherries, lettuce, leafy greens, I'm a bit resistant to go non-organic just because of the pesticide load. But it would be still not doing any greens versus,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you have to look at the risk reward, you know.
Yeah. And I think too, like there is like it is a bit of a mess right now because there was a lot of regulations in the last year that were loosened significantly when it comes to pesticides, and you can feel kind of like, well, gosh, what can I do? Because there's some aspect of it that is definitely out of our control. But you're right. I think there is a lot of value in just not skipping out on these things just because of that. Because there's things you can still do, like beans, and throw in a little bit of leafy greens, and ultimately it's like net positive. You know, if we're continuing to do that despite the stuff that we can't control.
I like that, net positive. It's a good thing to retain out there. I'll keep that for the rest of the day, net positive. Question for you as well. When it comes to warning signs, let's take constipation. Let's go into, with patients, have these warning signs that you sometimes ignore. Maybe share some of those warning signs of typical that you see where patients get a warning sign and they ignore it. What are the consequences of ignoring? And what's the body trying to tell you with these warning signs?
Yeah, I mean, as a dietitian, a GI, former GI dietitian, where I saw a lot of different things, I think that our body gives us cues way earlier than we're listening to. I think what the medical system associates as normal, I would say, hey, that if you're that uncomfortable, and I think it's very important to do something about it. So I used to work at, in addition to my practice, when I had a group practice, I used to also do some work as a GI dietitian at an IBD center, but I saw like all kinds of gastrointestinal situations. And you'd see people going one time a week, dependent on laxatives, or just really struggling or dealing with stuff like painful bloating, abdominal pain, and maybe nothing's even diagnosable, but they're still struggling. I think that's your gut giving you some clues as to what's going on inside. Even when you think about conditions like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, having seen many patients in that particular area, even when it comes to flare-ups, there's signs that your body kind of gives you that you might be heading down that road. I know in ulcerative colitis, something that we'll often hear people say is like changes in like the smell of like gas, like they start to have more gas. And a lot of this does boil down to the microbiome. Like we can make some general guesses as to why that is, just because of the additional hydrogen sulfide production in the gut, and the mechanisms that happen that precede a flare. It is so common to hear people notice like these slight things that are not like warning signs that would lead you to go to your GI, but they're like your gut's way of warning you that, like, hey, I need attention and I need support. And so I think that's really interesting. And so.
Have you seen a change over the years since you got into practice where more people are listening to those signs and coming in earlier versus waiting till it's later on in progression?
Sadly, no. I feel like I've seen there's more people that are gut aware, for sure. There's people that are more aware of the microbiome. There's people that are a little less afraid to talk about poop, a little less afraid to talk about their gut. But I feel like as in our private practice, we really wish that we could see people sooner. I think that oftentimes there's a disconnect with understanding that nutrition is an important, like, nutrition can treat these things. Like, I think people have a disconnect with that reality. Usually the story is when people have really sensitive guts, what they're doing is they're taking everything out of their diet that they think triggers them, and instead of confronting it head on, and like, I think the thought of what a dietitian is that a dietitian's going to take something out and make you more restricted. But in our practice, it's really the opposite. Like, we really use color and fiber, and we use them in modifiable ways to actually treat people's symptoms and expand the diet. I think the missing piece is often people think that, they think restriction's the answer, because it would make sense that, like, if I have this food and I have a symptom, I should just take it out. But it gets messy with people with gut issues because everything can be like that.
Yeah, you have multiple triggers, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I don't think people are aware that what's a trigger now might not be 6 months from now if you're really working on the microbiome. That triggers are not static. Like, you can actually modify your microbiome to see shifts and do things that are helpful to your gut and the gut environment. I think people think of those things as static instead of dynamic and always changing.
Do you, when it comes to your approach to, like, foods, do you encourage fermented foods? Do you stay away from fermented foods? Do you encourage fermented foods for increasing diversity?
I mean, we certainly encourage, I mean, if people like it, yeah. I think the bulk of what we will encourage, like, a lot of our, since we work with people like really sensitive guts, like maybe they're down to 3 to 5 safe foods or liquid only diet. So we work with like some of the worst case scenario challenges, like people with, even with strictures who have like narrowing of the GI tract where it makes fiber really complicated. And in those cases, like, and even in all the spectrum, we're working on like bringing a lot back in. So giving them a pathway to reintroduction of color and fiber and tools to like modify it so they don't have as many symptoms. So that's kind of what our like rainbow method is it's kind of that pathway to kind of like when you go to the gym to build a muscle. Our gut microbiome is the same way. We can build the muscle of the microbiome where we have less issues with those foods that commonly trigger us. So even beans, like beans have a kind of like a hierarchy of like the least challenging and the most challenging. Yes. So we kind of work up a tolerance with even stuff like beans. Because ultimately we know even in vulnerable populations, fiber is even more so very, very important. You know, fiber and prebiotics are the main way that we generate you know, our gut bacteria consume fiber, and it gives us short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which we know butyrate does so many things within not just the gut, but like systemically. And so that is like our main thing, is to try to incorporate more of that color, because we want to encourage more butyrate production, because it also protects our GALT, so our gut associated lymphatic system, which is just below, you know, the gut, your gut cells. Your gut cells are like one cell thick. It's a thin layer, and below that is like your GALT, and you have this mucus above the layer. And if you don't have fiber present, the gut microbes that feed off of that fiber are gonna feed at the mucus layer, and that they tend to destroy the mucus, which makes your immune system a lot more vulnerable when that happens. So that's why it's so important for people to have color and fiber in the diet, because if they don't, there's that can happen. And I guess the other side of that is if they don't, it makes it more likely that you have these not so great gut bacteria present. And when that happens, then those tend to be a lot of gram-negative bacteria, where that outer shell tends to have lipopolysaccharide or LPS. And then when you see that break down, you can have a lot of negative effects like inflammation, even connections with metabolic syndrome. But really are warning signs for something's not right. I mean, it could be constipation, it could be diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain. But I also think, we should be also thinking about even metabolic syndrome, even brain fog and stuff like that can sort of be this reflection of what's going on in the gut too.
And thank you for sharing that. Could you maybe speak on your own journey now? You explained that you'd started the practice partially informed and by your own journey with ulcerative colitis. Could you share your own story with the audience and how that led you to the path?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in it might have been almost 12 to 15 years ago. And I was actually a student athlete at the time, and thinking that I had something majorly wrong it was not even in my thought that could be a possibility for me. Because I felt gosh, I eat very healthy. I'm a runner, I was a runner at the time, and, health was I was all about it, that was such a primary forethought, even from in high school, when I ran in college, and then after college. And so, when I was diagnosed, I think it got missed a lot because I didn't have the class, there is no classic look, but I think people still look for, what it looks like. And so a lot of GIs told me, no, we don't think you have it. I think, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. And it wasn't until I was in a medical nutrition therapy class as a dietitian that I realized oh, this looks exactly like what I'm dealing with. And so then I went back and I kept advocating for myself to get a colonoscopy. I was I think something's wrong. I think I need to look into it. Years previously, I had no idea that I was probably dealing with it. I think the only signs I had was I was injured all the time as an athlete. I would get part of the way, and I would finally be making progress and finally be getting to a place where, a good spot, and then all of a sudden I'd be injured, and I'd be why am I always so prone to that? It just felt like such a tragedy. And I just knew that I couldn't, I never felt fully recovered like the people I was running with did. They could recover from stuff, and I just couldn't, and I would just easily get injured. And so once I kept advocating for myself, finally got a colonoscopy, and then they told me I had ulcerative colitis, and I think I still was in disbelief for a really long time. Did not think it could happen to me, didn't think, and I thought I could outsmart it too. I was no, it can't possibly be the case. And it was a struggle. The first 10 years of my journey were a bit of a struggle. One, getting access to medication, to feeling comfortable taking it, and knowing that, and learning that I can, that you can do both. You can do medication and you can also do nutrition. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. But it was a long journey to figuring that out for me. I definitely had some really difficult times when I was undertreated. I had a lot of hospital stays. I had some very tough, close calls.
Really?
Yeah, I had one hospital stay, and this ultimately taught me a lot about really being there for a patient. When you go through some of this stuff, and when you're not heard, and when you feel like you don't have a voice, it really teaches you, it gives you a sense of deep empathy for other people going through that. But I remember I didn't have outward gut symptoms at first, but I started getting these bumps on my body, and I was what is going on? This was after my diagnosis, but I didn't know what was happening, and my leg just swelled up, and I had like essentially cellulitis on an entire leg, and which is very dangerous.
Yeah, very
And
dangerous, yeah.
I didn't know what that was, so but I went to the ER. I had a bump on my head, I had a bump on my leg, and didn't know what happened. I think at first they thought it was Lyme. So that was like what they were testing for, because it did look kind of like a bump, like it looked like a Lyme sort of situation. And then I told them, I have ulcerative colitis, and they were like, oh, okay, we're changing gears. So then, then I had, I lost a lot of blood. I basically had like a septic infection, and we were dealing with that. And then, as if that wasn't enough, things were starting to make a positive turn. And then I was woken up one day by a provider who said, all right, we're going to go take you down to do some imaging on your liver mass. And I said, wait a minute, I think you might have the wrong room, because that's not me. I don't have a liver mass. And they were like, oh no one told you. And I was like, what do you mean? So then they had found a liver mass during that time, and I was so confused and sad and alone in the hospital, and just, it was just so incredibly scary. And so then they wanted to biopsy this liver mass, but as a practitioner myself, I was like, I just had a septic infection. I really don't want to do any sort of biopsy. I don't feel like that's urgent. And so they kept pushing me to do this, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. So I actually had to sign a release saying, against the medical advice, because I just knew. I was like, no, I know a little bit as a practitioner that I wouldn't want to do that, but also like, I had just had enough at that point, because if you lose a lot of blood and you're anemic, and they're thinking about doing blood transfusions, they'll wake you up every hour to do like additional labs, and you're just like, I can't even sleep or recover. Like, this is not good. So I learned a lot about advocating for myself, and just in real honestly, like knowing a little bit about how scary it can be for people that end up going to the hospital and having to go through all that. So anyways, I finally got out of the hospital, and with the liver mass, I got a couple of opinions about it that just didn't seem very hopeful. And then finally I was like, something's off. So then I went to someone else, and he was like, oh, that hospital is really known for like wanting to biopsy liver mass. Like, they're really known for that. And I was like, well, she was like, let's get more imaging. And we got more imaging, and it was there, but he said, let's give it 6 months. We don't want to just biopsy without, if it's close to the portal vein, like, that could be dangerous. So let's give it 6 months. And so during that time, I made a lot of changes based on what I knew about it. I knew it was like he said it was like they thought it was like a hormone driven thing. Like, he said a lot of women that get this have been on birth control. And I was like, well, I'm not on birth control, so I don't know. He's like, really? Okay. So then I just made changes based on what I knew. And then we did imaging in 6 months, and it was completely gone. And I think on the notes it said patient must have like taken off, stopped birth control or something. And I was like, no, I was never on it. Like, this is just a hormone driven thing that popped up, and it went away, which is not normal for that sort of thing. It was usually people have to get them taken out. So yeah, it's a very interesting journey, and it was a lesson too on like listening to yourself, like, when you listening to how you feel about stuff, and
your body provides those feedback.
Yeah, so it went away. I recovered. I got stable, and I've been in remission for a long time now. When I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, it was severe ulcerative colitis. So like throughout.
How many years ago was that?
I would say almost 15 since I got my diagnosis. Wow. But like with severe ulcerative colitis, normally people have to go with like heavy biologics to a lot of the people in the situation that I was in after after the hospital stay, they were discussing like surgery, like removal of, which I would have said yes to because I was in so much pain. I didn't at the time, but you know, I gave it some time and I avidly worked on it, and have been in remission, you know, for years now. And every time my GI does the colonoscopy, they're like kind of like looking for it to come back or look, but it's been in like deep remission, which what deep remission is it looks like, you know, you can have different stages of remission. You can have no symptoms, you can have no inflammation, you can also have like endoscopic or histologic remission, and that's where you like do a biopsy and there's no signs of inflammation. So it can look similar to a healthy colon minus the scar tissue and history there. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I've been in this deep remission for a while, and I really, truly credit like what I do in practice every day for the state that I'm in, like using the tools that I have. Obviously, medication is was an important journey for me too, as somebody with, you know, severe aversion. But I haven't had to escalate to biologics yet. I think there's a lot of these things that I do on a regular basis that has keeping me in a much better spot than it could have been.
Excuse me. You mentioned, first of all, incredible story, and it shows the resilience that you have, but also the fact that I'm sure, having been a runner myself at the top level, you have a self-awareness about your body, and probably more so than non-athletes. And the fact that despite what people were telling you, you had literally like a gut instinct of what was happening and what to do and make those changes. So I applaud you for that. The rainbow diet, when did you dive into sort of the rainbow method, I should say? I'm so used to saying rainbow diet, but rainbow method. Tell the audience about the rainbow method a little bit, but I also want to dive into gut love and the importance of fiber and also prebiotics, and maybe delve into that a bit.
Yeah, so the rainbow method is kind of like one thing that we were searching for as a team. All of our dietitians have IBD, and we really wanted to create like a path for people to expand diet expansion. So expanding their diet, because a lot of the people we work with are like, again, on they're unable to tolerate a lot of things. And so what we built is the rainbow method, which is, you can get a snapshot of it on our website for free if you're interested. You just sign up, and there's like, it looks like a game essentially. I wanted it to be fun because everything, when you're a patient, everything's clinical. Everything is like, I don't know. I have a lot of, into having medical trauma myself, of like I can go into a hospital and smell like the smell of alcohol, and I start having like, my blood pressure goes up, I have anxiety. And so like for me as a patient, knowing a lot of my patients are in the same boat, like they have medical trauma, everything's very like tense. I wanted to create something that was the opposite of that, that was like fun and colorful, and that is what it is. It's essentially like a game where each day you get like a challenge or something, and you go through kind of like what's that game? The game of, is it Life or something? But each day you get like a different thing, and then they have different levels, and so the idea is just to make it fun again and make it enjoyable and doable and accessible. So instead of like adding beans and a huge salad and like everything all at once, you have like a pathway to slow introduction so you don't get as many of those symptoms. So that's what that is. And we have, of course, when we're in practice, we have a larger scale version of this that we do, and we have other tools outside of just like diet expansion that we're looking at, but it's a small snapshot of it that we like to kind of show people, like that it doesn't have to be clinical and boring. It can be fun.
Make it fun, because I think for them to stay on a protocol and a plan, you've got to make it fun. Otherwise, I'm sure they would probably fall off the wagon if it wasn't. Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, it honestly should be fun. Like we want to get back to that, to building a good relationship with food, building like trust again and safety and enjoyment.
Yeah, and I think there's more choice now than when I grew up. I'm 60. When I grew up, there was probably more nutrients in the food. There wasn't as much soil depletion. There wasn't much glyphosate, but you didn't have the choice. Nowadays, you've got the choice of, you talk about spectrum, you've got choice. It's not just orange carrots, it's yellow, it's purple carrots, it's white carrots, it's black carrots. You can find same thing, potatoes, purple,
Yeah.
orange, etc. Tell me a little bit about gut love and why you formulated gut love and who's the audience for that. Maybe talk about the importance of the type of fiber that you included, but also the prebiotic focus of that within the fiber itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my interest has always been prebiotics and probiotics. Even when I was getting my master's, my thesis was on prebiotic and probiotic use in ulcerative colitis, and so I've always just been fascinated by it. Like I love learning about it. It was kind of even when I was diagnosed, I used to talk about it a lot with my cousin who was also diagnosed. And we would just like marvel at like all the stuff we were learning about the microbiome. And it's just always been like a bright spot for me and something that has given me like hope and excitement and joy. And when I think I mentioned earlier that I did some work with a big IBD center out here where I live. They have multiple locations, and I was the only GI dietitian in all of Houston for this particular medical center.
Wow. Wow.
And I saw so many things during that time. I did research in the space of IBD nutrition, and also one of the things that I encountered during this time is because I saw so many different people, some of the GIs would come up to me and said, one of them in particular that retired was like, hey, all of my patients are better. Like, what are you doing? They don't need me anymore. And she mostly saw people with like pretty bad constipation, diarrhea. That was most of the referrals from her, were more general GI issues. And I said, yeah, I'm using lots of like what we know about like prebiotics and probiotics, and I started to see over and over like a certain type of picture, and this particular strain and prebiotic would work well with that. And you start to make these conclusions because it's kind of like it's an interesting place to be when you see such a large volume of people. You start to see trends, and you start kind of like research. And I saw the same thing in my private practice. I started to see those trends a little easier. The larger that we got, the more trends I saw. And of course, like as someone who likes to create, I wanted to create something that fit that people could just use as a tool, and also as a way to bridge the fiber gap that I saw in my practice of like people struggling to get prebiotics and fiber. There's a lot of microbiome challenges in IBD patients that, we tend to have lower of the good stuff, more of the not so great stuff. So I wanted to be able to bridge that gap in an easy, sustainable way. And so that's kind of the reason I created that product. But when I was working at that IBD center, there was many GIs that were like coming to me and just like kind of curious about what was happening. Like, what are you doing? And so, I think that encouraged me because I think when I started, I wasn't getting hardly any referrals, and people were a little closed off to the idea. They didn't understand my role or my value that I was adding, but I had to sort of prove myself. I had to say like, yeah, I can help that person and then prove it, like show them that I can. And so, I think that was really what sparked me to do it, because I was able to see what I was thinking in my private practice initially, but then seeing that on this larger scale, almost in a research sense of like what was possible for people.
Yeah.
So then I created the product and sold out very quickly, quicker than I thought, as you already know. And people were very attached to it. So when I sold out, I got a lot of like angry messages that were people like, because they couldn't find that exact thing elsewhere because it was unique. I had a version of it that wasn't a pill. That was a prebiotic and a probiotic. And it was helping people so well that, they were understandably angry that they couldn't get it and that there was such a long wait. But, thankfully you helped me get out of that and we figured it out, and now you're kind of building all that back. But yeah, that's why I created it. And I think in terms of gut love, it will always be kind of rooted in the gut microbiome and different tools that we can use to kind of help people with bridging that gap and like really help build back our microbiomes, and creating tools to help with that is really kind of where my heart lies.
Yeah, and I think also you can see the passion that comes through in what you do. That's evident in your philosophy and your practice, but also in the product, because I know when we were looking and sourcing out ingredients for you, you have specific requirements, and having that scientific data behind the materials, using trademarked ingredients that have some research and data behind it. So you're not going in blind, both as a practitioner, but also as a patient. You're not taking something that has no validation behind it. You actually have validated ingredients at the forefront of your formulas.
Yeah, and I was so thankful that you appreciated that and where I was with that, because I don't know if you knew this, but I found a stat the other day that was like only 16% of products, supplements out on the market actually have like clinical studies or clinical backing behind them. So there's a lot out on the market, and then only 12% actually third-party tests. There's a lot out on the market that is created. I don't know if it's more that the people creating them maybe are disconnected from their product or the research behind it, or maybe some of it's like profit centered and not really focused on the patient, but there's certainly a disconnect. Yeah.
And I think here at Freedom to Formulate, it's just that, like, you have a passion for formulation, and we appreciate the synergistic relationship that we have with you, Ashley. And I think also out there, it's a wide spectrum on the landscape, just like there's a wide spectrum of colors in the diet available to any patient. It's a choice. You could find something coming from overseas and it might be a fraction of the cost, but is it full of heavy metals? Is the data behind it? Is it making the situation worse? Is it true identity? Is it actual potency? At time of use, not at time of, manufacturer, but at time of use. Tell me a little bit about also, you've got the LP299V in there, the Pro B. Why the inclusion of that? There's some good data behind the plantarum in there as well.
Yeah, it's a really well studied strain, and like in terms of like, there's good data on it, especially for like bloating reduction, abdominal pain, even stool improvements, and also like that was one that I saw a lot of like good data in practice and use of it. And that's the other side, is you want not just like good data, but like if you've used it, like do you get the same results? And I've gotten great results with that strain with the particular people we work with, and I think it helps to ease some of the symptoms that people get as they're expanding their diet. They might get bloating and gas and a pain. So that was an important inclusion for me, as well as like the acacia fiber as well, fiber gum. Settled on that one because one, it dissolves completely, so it's easy to use, and so people could just throw it in coffee or tea and be fine. But also the solubility of it helps encourage the growth of your lactobacillus and bifido species, but also is easy on the gut, which is the other side of, obviously, like the whole gut love premise is like for sensitive guts, like for people that struggle. So, yeah, it needed to be something that was easy to use and also easy to tolerate.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we are super excited to see Gut Love continue to thrive. Are there any final sort of messages, or what are the most important sort of leave behinds that you want the audience to know about what you do, and what maybe the most important things for some of the patients out there to sort of think about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my big takeaway, the more I learn about the microbiome, the more I see how connected it is to other things. We didn't even get to talk about, some of the things like with, like constipation and stuff, and how, all that's linked to, maybe for another time. but yeah, like there's so many connecting points. So anything you can do to nourish it is great. Color and fiber is really the name of the game, and omega-3s. Those are really your key tools for helping support that. Focusing on what you can add versus what you can need to take away or restrict, I think, is also an important key component. For patients, if you feel kind of stuck, like you can't tolerate stuff, there is a path. There are ways to tolerate. You're not as stuck as it feels. Yeah. I think you may need to get some support with somebody that can help guide you through that process, but keep trying. I think that's an important thing too, is sometimes, what's hard now might not be when you start like doing things a little bit at a time. I think you and I get that as athletes, because
yeah, you start to see, hey, yeah. You talked about recovery until you sort of started that journey and solving that once you get to that point, you start getting signs. Oh, wow, okay, before my recovery time between 400-meter repeats used to be 1 minute, then it goes to 45 seconds, then it goes to 30 seconds, and you know that when you get to 30 seconds, your recovery time is really optimal, and it's like your body gives that feedback and makes the adjustments. But it happens over time. Sure, we can maybe spend the last few minutes talking about, I think, definitely constipation. I think that's a sort of a big thing. What are the most important takeaways, and when it comes to interesting stats? Yeah.
I think sometimes we don't give it enough credit. Like the stool, we don't give it enough credit as a guide as to like what's actually going on in the gut. I know one thing we know about constipation is people that are constipated do tend to have more methane producing bacteria. So methane producing bacteria can slow things down. That's the whole mechanism of it. And one of the challenges with it slowing things down is if your gut microbiome is not optimal, you can have more gram-negative bacteria, which the gram-negative bacteria, their outer shell is made up of this endotoxin called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. And that's really the driver for a lot of issues that we see with constipation, because if it's slowed down, there is a chance for reabsorption of things. Particularly, LPS is not something we want to reabsorb. But some of the things that we see are surprising to me. I jotted down some of them. Neurological stuff, we see cardiovascular stuff. So when it comes to neurological, even stuff like Parkinson's, we can see a 227% increased risk of developing it. So if you're constipated long term, that is a risk factor, as is cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, 2 to 3 to 4-fold risk, even stroke, 20% increased risk. Blood clots, 204% increase. Anxiety, another one too. We know about the gut-brain connection, 33% increased risk of developing it. So there is this huge gut microbiome component, and even though when we think about it in a clinical sense, I think they don't, in a hospital setting, they're not going to notate it true constipation unless it's less than 3 per week. But I think that as a clinician who understands the microbiome, that's not good enough. We need to be going every day to really see prevention of some of the things that can happen longer term. So, and a lot of people are, if you go to your GI, a lot of times the main tools that they have are, you've got your Imodium for diarrhea, you've got your Miralax, you've got some of those tools that kind of keep you swinging back and forth and not necessarily solving the problem. When I was working in a hospital setting, that was one of the things that I tried to like ease people away from and give them tools like the product I developed, for example, which helps with both constipation and diarrhea. Acacia fiber is great for that. So giving them tools that both build up the microbiome and change out, like help restore some of the better bacteria, but also treat the actual malfunction. So instead of going from constipation to then diarrhea, people can just settle in a normal area. So yeah, doing stuff like that can be a great tool for actually treating it. But yeah, there's so many like long-term effects. Even when we think about metabolic syndrome, which we don't normally think about as gut-driven, there are so many connections to LPS and, in terms of increasing insulin or decreasing insulin sensitivity, and there's these connections with blood pressure and cardiovascular risk. So it's the link is there, and I think we're coming at it like systemically from the wrong angle. We're trying to treat all these other ways instead of looking at the huge role of the gut microbiome and how much that can play into things. Why not just get the bowels moving first and then kind of focus on the other things?
It's like working on a exterior of a house where you've got a compromised foundation, and you haven't fixed a foundation, and you're put a new roof on, and you're putting new windows in, and yet the foundation is completely broken. I super appreciate you. Would love to have you on to expand on further topics in the future. I know the last thing I wanted to bring up before we finish today's broadcast is the role of, besides diets, and besides prebiotics and probiotics and the D, we mentioned fatty acids and things to maybe address the butyric acid deficiencies. What about the role of stress management when it comes to colitis and Crohn's? I would assume that would be also a key component for people that are coming from a highly stressful environment or some type of relationship.
Yeah, I definitely think for me personally, like that was one of the big things that I really had to change my relationship with stress and create an environment that I could heal in. Because like when we look at stress and even just IBD in general, IBD is a stressful disease. Like Crohn's and colitis, it's incredibly stressful to have it. But I remember this research that I heard about on a TED Talk once, and it was Making Stress Your Friend was the title. And she looked at stress in terms of our response to stress, not necessarily the stressor, because people can have all sorts of stress and everyone responds differently to it. So some people, for some people moving could be exciting and fun. For a large majority of people, it could be really stressful. It all depends on like how you interpret that stress. And so she looked at things like how their body actually responded, and then even stuff like all-cause like mortality of stress long term. So she looked at this like long-term stress, and the main takeaway for me was the stressor doesn't always matter. It's our response to it and our ability to build stress resilience. And so that was like a really cool finding, because it's like it's stressful to even think about, like once you know the data on stress and you know like, oh, this increases my risk of flare-up, this increases all these things, it becomes its own stressor, because then you're like, oh my god, how do I get rid of all the stress? And you can't get rid of all the stress. And so it's more about like, how can I adapt? How can I build a healthy response? How can I change my environment to be more conducive to me, feel it thriving and feeling less stress long term? So I think that's where I landed with it, was just I always try to encourage people to build stress resilience techniques, because we live in a stressful world where it's there's plenty of things we could be stressed about. But
there is. I think every day, but there was a profound quote in the Second World War, and a gentleman called Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp, And he had a famous quote. He said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And now imagine you're in a concentration camp, you're seeing people being gassed, killed, and yet you somehow can choose to your response from that stimulus. Because obviously overwhelming stimulus in the concentration camp for most people would probably be a negative stimulus. And yet you can choose that response. And that's just so profound that he survives the camp and has some of these legendary, profound words that stay with you. Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful.
It's very powerful. Well, to be continued on a future broadcast, hopefully. You're welcome anytime. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. And we appreciate Ashley taking the time out for today's podcast. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.